About my cons about this story. I gotta think about it.
I'm thinking about my cons. I feel like you should have like a cigarette along, like.
Oh my gosh, okay. Hey guys, it's Amanda here, your cutie of Carnage, here on another episode of Channel Sundown.
Hey guys, I'm JESS KORESH. Nice to meet you.
We're going to review one of my favorite vampire films. Yes, vampire films. Don't really jump into those films very often, but there are a few that are my favorite. We're going to be talking about
Twilight.
We're going to be talking not about Twilight, but 1978 Martin.
Damn, Gina!
Martin is actually directed by the one, the only, George A. Romero. Yes, a lot of people don't know about Martin as a film because a lot of people jump into his zombie films. But Martin is one of those little tiny films that are overlooked often. It's often overlooked. But it is a film that deserves much attention. The story is about Martin, our young man from Indianapolis, who travels from Indianapolis to Pittsburgh to live with his cousin slash uncle. We're going to go ahead and say that. He's much older than he is. But in the story, he basically refers to him as his cousin.
Pretty sure.
Yes.
I just watched it.
Martin stars John Amplas, who plays Martin, Christine Foster, who plays Christina, George Romero, and Tom Savini. George Romero plays a priest, a father, and Tom Savini plays Arthur, Christina's love interest. Martin is about a young man, we're going to say that in quotation, a young man named, spoiler, Martin, who travels from Pittsburgh to Indianapolis to stay with his cousin. We're going to kind of put that in there because
I swear he calls him his cousin.
yeah, it's his cousin because I've always thought it was his cousin. So he travels to Pittsburgh to live with his cousin uncle who lives there and decides to go ahead and house Martin in his home after Martin goes through a very unfortunate tragedy with his family and needs somewhere to live. Cousin, uncle decides to go ahead and give him room and board. Well, the thing about that, it's a very tricky story in itself. It's really hard to kind of discuss the story because I say this a lot, I am very aware, but this film is one of those films that going into with less information is the best. When you start watching the film, you're kind of like, alright, with the story, you're kind of like, I think I'm taking this story in this way, and then it comes the other way. When he first comes to the house, his cousin's very like, oh, you know, I'm gonna welcome you and everything with open arms, but I think you're unholy and there's something wrong with you, so I'm going to destroy you.
I'm gonna hang garlic all over the place just to be on the safe side.
Exactly.
Put a lot of crosses up, you know, just
exactly, because there's something wrong with Martin, he thinks. So, watching the film, you're very like, oh, maybe it's all in this crazy guy's head. And it's kind of up and down because you don't know really what you're watching and what you're grasping. Because when I saw the film, honestly, touch and go, I was very like, is he a vampire? Is he not a vampire? And that's why I'm not going to really jump into the story so much. Because that was kind of what I enjoyed about the story itself, was kind of going up and down and just being like, oh, what's going on? Like, is he a vampire? Is he not a vampire? And that comes to kind of my pros and cons of the story. I love this movie. I know love is a very strong word, but I do. I'm a big fan of this movie. That being said, there are a few kind of quirks of the story that I've kind of like, I don't know, but that is on spoiler territory. So I will say in the fact of, I didn't like some of the hiccups along with the story of kind of like when you were watching it, you're kind of like, is he a vampire? Is he not a vampire? Is he just crazy? Because that's what the story does a lot for you. It kind of makes you feel the person. And there's a lot of scenes of just in your mind of what is in his head versus reality. And you kind of grasp into that with the story. When it happens in his head, you see it. But then when it happens in reality, you see that. In his head, something shows, you know, in his mind of him, you know, doing something to somebody, and then it shows the reality of what happens. So it's like romantic, you know, Twilight, or, you know, 28 Days Later. You know, it's kind of like either or. Positive, I think, in my standpoint, I appreciated the film for its hiccups, but at the same time, there was a lot of times, like, towards not the ending, but before the ending, that whole debacle of just, you know, him versus, not gonna spoil it, but just him versus Dia and stuff, and just him as a character trying to grasp who he is, and then the ending, right before the ending, you're kind of like, oh, okay, and then the ending happens, and I'm like, I don't think that they dived as much into him. The story didn't, I don't think, but the visuals were very, very appealing with the character. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but I thought it was, I wouldn't so much say it was a con to the story, but I feel like they could have went a whole lot more in depth with the story. That being said, I think the story was great the way it was. So it's one of those things that, like, I'm probably complaining about it, but I think if they did it, I probably want to like the story as much. So I'm just going to say I don't really have many cons with the story. My cons are probably just me trying to find, you know, smallest watermelon. Either way, it's still a watermelon.
I also loved this movie. I thought it was really great. The story, my pros and cons are actually the same, because my pros to the story are there's a lot of mystery around it. But like you kind of said, that's also one of the cons. But I don't think that was so much, and you might agree with me on this, I don't think that was so much as the story. I think the movie wasn't edited all that well. I think maybe that there was more story originally, and they cut a lot of it out with editing, because some of the edit, like you said, some of it looks choppy to me. Like, don't get me wrong, there are some really great scenes in the movie, like the scene in the house. I feel like that was all maybe taken in like one long take, and it looks really well, but they're really good. But there are some scenes in the movie that just kind of, they cut really fast to other things, and I feel like, I know editing movies was a lot more difficult back then, but I think all the problems I had with the story were probably because of editing. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Like, I feel like there was probably initially, like, if there's like a director's cut out there somewhere, that there may be a lot more to the story, and like they might go more in depth with the characters, but they had to cut it for time or something. I don't know, because I think that would explain the choppy editing. A lot of it's not. And like, you know how they did, and I'm not talking about like where they did the flashback scenes, and it's black and white. Do you remember that part?
Yes.
I like that a lot. I thought that was, and it kind of gave you that old school, like, Night of the Living Dead feel with the black and white, you know, and you could tell that it was obviously like a, you know, a flashback. But I thought that was a good addition to the story. Do you think that maybe they didn't dive enough into the characters' motives?
That's kind of a tricky question, because actually, like, I think they didn't, they dived as much as they should have, I think. Because whenever you go into it, without spoiling it, guys, because I'm telling you, you guys should watch this movie, okay? So I'm not going to go into spoilers, but the scene when he starts doing what he's doing, it kind of dives into it to where I keep saying uncle, his cousin talks about the family history. And he says about everything that's going on in his family and his cousin and whatnot. It gives just enough to explain what you need to, because within all reality, life will never give you answers. Really. Honestly. Yes, sad but true indeed. Life will never give you answers. And that's what I feel like Romero does with a lot of his films. With a lot of, the undead films. With Martin, great example for Martin, is his films kind of have a graduated idea. Where, you see Night of the Living Dead was kind of his birth of an undead. Birth of an idea of the living dead. And then it kind of it just transes to that. You have Night of the Living Dead, you have Day of the Dead, you have Dawn of the Dead. You go on, and I feel like, I don't think Martin really established a kind of movie franchise as much as, because Martin, whether or not, he's a vampire, what have you, guys watch the films, it did not stick to any of that. Martin didn't, spoiler, he doesn't sparkle. You can see in the trailer, he walks around in the daytime, like,
regular dude.
Just a regular dude, so he doesn't follow a lot of those ideas. And in the film, he makes fun of that. He makes fun of that, and he shows it, and he plays against that kind of role that is given to him by others. People that want him gone, who see this idea, and that's what I feel a lot of the story does too within the film. Because you look at, not trying to get too deep, but you look at, racism, homophobia, of all these people that just, not trying to compare the hatred of vampires to that, guys. Sorry, I'm not. But you look at this idea of people who just want to grasp and destroy something for not totally understanding and having this idea. People are like, oh, I don't want, this to happen because I'm not okay with it and I don't know it and I don't understand it. You have these people who are against this vampire who, they're like, oh, you're a vampire because you hate garlic and you run around with a cape and you have fangs. And spoiler alert, Martin doesn't.
You can't go out in the daylight.
Exactly.
You're scared of crosses.
Exactly.
All the vampire stereotypes.
Yeah, they sit there and he pushes and it's just one of those things that, like, the film sort of, it doesn't make it cartoony. It doesn't make it, and by all means, guys, I know it's a horror film, and people are like, oh, it's a horror film, man, you're looking too much into it. But you have to understand that, this film takes what everyone deals with every day and what everyone thinks, what everyone sees, and an idea, a grasping of an idea, and taking it to something as literal as a vampire film, and just being like, hey, this is this right here. People are like, well, vampires aren't real. And I'm like, okay, well, what if you guys took this and made it into this? But that's just my idea. I could be talking out of turn about it, but that's why I love this film. This is one of those films, I really don't have many cons of the storyline, but I think it's a great story. I think the story is fantastic, so.
I just want to say, like all good George Romero movies, it's very socially aware, and it's nothing in this movie is spoon-fed to the audience, which for the time period was pretty rare. And I think that if this movie, a lot of people haven't heard of this movie. I'd never heard of this movie until you mentioned it. And it's it's kind of hard to find on anything. It's not on any of the streaming services or anything like that. And but I think if this movie were released now, that it would be pretty big. It'd be like a bigger deal now than it was then. And I would almost say that this is a horror movie for people that don't like horror movies. You don't have to be a horror fan to appreciate this movie. It's kind of a mystery. It's got a lot of drama to it. I mean, I think this is a movie that anyone that enjoys good cinema would like.
I agree with that also. I really do agree with that, because whenever I try to I try to talk a lot of people into watching this film, and I only got Jesse to because a lot of my friends started watching. They were like not getting to the beginning, but they watched the beginning. They were just like, this just doesn't seem like clean. I'm like, oh.
Clean.
Yeah, they're like, there's a lot of stuff going on, and not going to spoil it, guys, but yeah, a lot of stuff happens.
Yeah.
But anyways, a lot of people don't. I guess they need a shower afterwards. I don't know.
It's not a dumb horror movie,
Yeah.
you know. And if you want a dumb horror movie, then this isn't the movie for you.
So now that we talked about the story and her opinions about the story, we're going to then move on to, of course, the acting. So, of course, we have John Amplas, who plays our starring character, Martin. And we also have Christine Forrest, who plays, this is funny, Christina. Christine plays Christina, who is related to Martin, who is his cousin's daughter, who comes to the house. And she gets a little friendship with Martin and what have you. And she is actually married to George Romero. So this is really funny. She was in a few films, and it wasn't until I actually looked up her name, I was like, wait a minute, she was in a lot of George Romero films. They're married, so of course they are. So, and then we have the boyfriend to the Christina character, Arthur, who's played by Tom Savini. Tom Savini is in the film. Of course he is. He's in everything. He's fantastic. But yeah, he plays the boyfriend. She and him are together, and that's her way of getting out of the house, getting away and everything. And then we have Father Howard, played by George Romero. So, that being said, the acting was good. Very interesting. I'll have to say, I was actually really surprised at the acting of Martin. I really think he was good. I think he was great as the role, because the thing about the character, it is very difficult to play his character without making it downright either pathetic or dangerous. Look at the character, and although there's a lot of mischievous, dangerous, murderistic, that's not a word,
Should be.
murderistic behavior, there are points in the film where you can see the character kind of rationalize what he does in his thoughts and how he kind of translate his behavior in his own mind, how he kind of switches it to make it an idea different from what he's actually doing. Saying that without spoiling, like he's doing something so horrific, he kind of translates it back in his head like, oh, this is how it's happening, versus the reality of what he's doing and what's actually going on. And there's actually a scene that I'm not going to get into with the spoiling, but the scene with, there's a house, he's spying on a woman, and comes to find out, it's not what he's thinking is happening, and he shows up, and he kind of dives into the situation and kind of goes to rationalizing, and I say that very loosely. He rationalizes what he's doing to what they're doing. So he's like, it's okay, I do this, but they were doing this, and you're like, no, that's not okay. It's not okay that you did that. There was points in the film where I kind of found myself staring, and I'm just like, oh, he's actually really feeling this emotion, and he's feeling this, because you don't really often see films when when a vampire is portrayed in a way that you're like feeling for all the evil he's done, because you have to understand he's trying to rational. And I'm not trying to he's trying to rationalize everything that's going on with him. I'm not trying to get too personal with this, but I've been thinking about this film a lot. I'm not trying to compare the same thing, but kind of like when I have moments, after, everything that's happened with me with, you know, my accident and just going through my brain issues and just going through treatments and stuff, there's moments of like, I just have anger. I have anger. And then I try to sit there and rationalize my anger into something that would make sense to me. And when I do that, I kind of find myself kind of making it relatable to something not on the same hemisphere as what I'm trying to make it into. So that being said, I don't go around, you know, killing people, but, you know, I do say a few things sometimes that I gotta regret, that I'm like, ooh, I didn't really mean that, but hey, you know, I was not having a good day. It's just really, really interesting how he can just sit there and grasp that moment and that idea and take it into something where you don't want it. Like, I can watch this, there's not many films I can watch with vampires where I actually feel for the character. A lot of, spoiler alert, a lot of vampire films I can't handle, I can't stand the vampires. I'm not going to say which films, but we could probably guess a few. But there's a few films the vampires, I'm just like, can you just stop? And can you just go home? Like, go away? But no, this film is not one of them. I really identify with, not identify, I want to say identify. Sounds really bad because like, identify with the character. But I wouldn't even say relate. I can feel kind of, you know, of course what he does is you're like, ooh, ah. But I can actually feel sympathy for the character with just, you know, his mind and what it is. Because although there are very brutal scenes and very carnage. CUTIE carnage.
I see what you did there.
I know, see? Carnage, you also see moments of just, you know, sensitivity, and I guess you can say that, sensitivity and just overwhelming feelings. Not knowing, not understanding things, because the main thing of fear is the unknown. So, yeah.
That being said, I have a little bit to say about the acting. It's a 70s movie, and I watch a lot of 70s. You know, 70s horror movies are kind of my thing. The acting is over the top. But that's just the way they acted in the 70s. You know what I mean? Like, it was very over the top. But it was also very fitting for Martin's character because, like you were saying, he's a very complicated character because even though he has this very dark side, he's also very innocent. There are a lot of moments where you realize, like, wait a minute, this guy's pretty, you know, he's kind of naive. He doesn't have, he's very sheltered. He doesn't have a lot of interaction with the outside world. So there's a lot of things that he doesn't know a lot about. So he's a very complicated character, and I think that in this case, kind of being a little bit over the top, fit his character well. But yeah, the acting was decent in the movie. He did a really good job. I love the fact that George Romero and Tom Savini are in this movie because you know it's not because they were trying to show off and put themselves in their movie. It's because it was a low-budget movie and they were trying to save money. And you know what I mean? It's kind of like, so that makes it to me a lot cooler than them being in the movie than, say, when Kevin Smith is making a $1 million blockbuster and he decides to put himself in it, or M. Night Shyamalan putting himself in the movie. You know what I mean? Like, you know, they had to, like, hey, let's save a little bit. You play the priest and I'll be the, and you know, you know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of got like that old school indie, you know. I don't know. It made me feel good.
High five.
Yeah, like, hey, yeah, like, let's do this shit. You know, like, let's get this movie made. And so I like that about the movie. But yeah, the acting was better. Some of the better acting in the 70s horror films that I've seen. Good movie. We agree. It's a good movie.
I know. We agree on something.
As far as the gore in this movie goes, there's not a whole lot. I mean, it is a vampire movie, so you're going to see some blood. But as we all know, blood looked a lot different in the 70s than it does in, say, Saw or something like that. It's not. I feel like I say this a lot, but it's very tastefully done in this movie. It's not anything, you know. It's not anything over the top. It fits the movie well. It plays well. All the gory scenes, any scenes with blood in them, they advance the story. There's nothing gratuitous in the movie. They're not just doing it, you know, they're not cutting somebody's head off just for the sake of cutting someone's head off or anything like that.
Right.
So everything that they do in this movie pushes the story along and gives you some insight into the character, and you know. So as far as that goes, I thought there was just the right amount of gore. I wouldn't even say gore, blood. I mean, there's blood. There's obviously blood in the movie, but it's not a gory movie at all, as far as I'm concerned.
I was actually, when I first saw the film, I was actually really surprised because being, you know, with George Romero, as you know, zombie films and what have you, I was actually really surprised and very happily impressed with the fact that, you know, you watch vampire films usually, well, current ones, we're not talking about 80s, but current, where you go watch a vampire film and they're like ripping the bodies open and like biting it and eating, like they're not just drinking blood, they're eating the guts, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like, but even that, you know, don't want to spoil the film. That it is what it is. They drink blood, so it's blood. You're not going to see somebody pull out a kidney and, you know, eating the kidney, you know. And I was really impressed because I would think, you know, George Romero, the creator of the zombies, make a vampire film, you would think, you know, it's going to be, you know, literally hands deep, just like, you know, but it wasn't. But it was very, that's the thing about the vampire franchise, is that a lot of people misinterpret what it really was and is with the stories of the vampires. And like a lot of the 80s films, that I don't want to get into it, but 70s and 80s films kind of hold on to the story and the fiction of vampires and kind of take it for what it is and understand it and have a respect for it, versus it's gotten so much of a gore kind of feed where people are like, oh, vampires are gonna, you know, I mean, I hate to say it, but it was like, you know, after a few films, people were like, all right, well, they're gonna drink blood, but they're gonna like cut the head off and eat some eyeballs while they're at it. You know, it's like, oh, okay, well, vampires eat eyeballs too, apparently. But I was very impressed with, you know, the lack of gore. That being said, I mean, there's stuff in the film. I'm not going to say, like, there's things in the film that take place of the gore that are actually pretty hard to stomach. And I mean that in the most positive of critiques.
Positive, get his blood.
The most uplifting critiques, I'd rather say. It's unpleasant, yet pleasant.
Yeah, I mean, this movie is kind of a contradiction, though. That's what I like about it.
Yes.
It doesn't, you know, like, I think what you were trying to say is, like, even though we have all these different vampire movies throughout the years, they all kind of fit into this little box. They're, you know, like I'm saying, there's the vampire myth. It always fits into, like, you know, even though there are slight variations throughout the years, they all have the same, like we touched on earlier, you know, garlic and crosses and, you know, can't be in the sunlight and all that kind of stuff. And I like that this movie, the vampire in this movie doesn't fit in any kind of box.
Vampire, we're gonna see.
Yeah, vampire.
Yeah.
Just, you're gonna have to watch this movie.
Yes, you're gonna have to watch this movie.
You know, the reason that this movie, this movie isn't well known, and I was wondering, I was gonna ask you about this, if you think maybe it didn't get the attention because it wasn't what people were expecting. But do you think that maybe people were expecting it to be gory, and then they were like watching this and like, this is actually just like a really good independent drama, you know what I mean? Like, do you think maybe that's why? Because people were like, oh, it's George Romero, it's going to be blood and guts and gore, and then they saw it and it was something, you know, completely else, different. And over time, people have learned to respect this maybe more and appreciate it for what it actually was.
Wasn't I'm gonna feed you what you want kind of deal.
Yeah.
It was like, you have to, it's a very questionable film. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, like, you're watching it and throughout the whole film you're thinking, wait a minute, what's this? I'm thinking a lot of people are like, it didn't give me like everything I wanted.
Yeah.
It wasn't this right away. And it was like, hey, you know, this is this. Like I said, I think they're expecting to watch and be like, he's gonna be a vampire. He's gonna go around. He's gonna meet a girl. The girl's gonna defeat him. Then she's gonna get away, and the end. And he's gonna find himself, and he's gonna turn back to. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, and it wasn't that.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking that if people watched it now, that they appreciate more, because now you have movies like, I'm thinking of like A Ghost Story, Transfiguration, all these kind of movies that more modern movies that tell you a story in a different kind of way, and I don't think people were really expecting that in a movie at the time. Like, I think people really wanted, especially the horror movies, to be spoon fed to them. You know what I mean? Like, hey, he's got a chainsaw and he's chasing people and he's, and there's naked breast, and, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's what people wanted, and I think people probably saw. I mean, I don't know because I wasn't there when the movie came out. I didn't see that, but I'm thinking that people might have been disappointed by this when they, like when they went to see it.
On an off note, I think it's so funny I use Transfiguration, because when I saw Transfiguration and when we were talking about doing a review on it, I kept mentioning Martin. Every time I talked about it, I was like, it reminds me of that film, Martin.
Oh, I get, it was definitely,
Yeah.
it was definitely influenced.
Yeah,
I
was like, Martin.
There are certain movies throughout time that have been more influential than they have been popular, and I would definitely say that Martin is one of these, because you can definitely tell that it influenced a lot of movies.
Yes, and definitely Transfiguration. So, off subject, if you guys like Transfiguration, you'll like Martin. Just saying. Just saying. If you guys haven't seen Transfiguration, then watch Martin, then watch Transfiguration. Just saying. It's out there. The sound and the visual. Now, this one, I have a lot to say about that. If I haven't said enough already, guys, I have a lot to say about the sound and the visual. Very happy with the sound and the visuals. That being said, it was not Oscar worthy. Don't get me wrong, it was not Oscar worthy. And it's nothing that made me go, oh man, I need IMAX. No. Really happy with the sound. When you guys watch this, okay, I'm not going to spoil, but the home invasion scene, just spoil. We're not going to say who invaded what or what was invaded, but home invasion scene, there was a lot of sounds, and the train scenes, and a certain scene towards the end, I'm not going to say, but there's a lot of scenes where it just has, oh man. See, I'm trying not to spoil, but there are scenes that happen in circumstances where it's certain ticks and certain and very robotic kind of scores where it sounds like a video game, and it's very, as weird as it sounds, it was very intriguing and kind of had me kind of get closer. I'm like, wait, what's going on? It's like and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And like the home invasion scene, like I said, it was like, and then the ring, and then you're just like, wait, what? So it's really awkward to hear scenes with like just screaming and crying and yelling, like being surrounded by beep 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 beep. It's kind of like, but at the same time, it was very intriguing. Yeah. It drew me close. I'm like, what am I listening to?
It's funny that you say that, because in particular, I know the alarm scene like you're talking about, it goes on for a while.
Yeah, it does.
But it was like doing things in my head, because I was like, oh, okay, the alarms went off, and then I was like, oh my god, that's getting annoying. But then I like gained an appreciation for how far they took it and how long it went, and I was like, okay, they're like, fuck you, this is what we're doing.
Exactly,
and like, either you're along for the ride or you're not. You know what I mean? And so it's like I went through this like, oh, okay, it's an alarm. Oh my god, the alarm's getting on my nerves. Oh my, and then I'm like, oh no, I see what they're doing. Like, okay, it's making me feel a certain way, and that's exactly what they're trying to do.
Exactly. But yeah, it just the beep 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 beep, and then and then the anyways, I'm making noises now, but it's very good.
Amanda's available to do sound for your independent movie if you're looking for something.
Kind of leads us to the end of our review, and I'm going to go ahead and get to my verdict first. If I haven't said it before, I was saying it, I love this movie. I love this movie. I talk about this film all the time. I love this film. This film is fantastic. I want people to watch it more. I got one person to watch it. So I'm going to get more people on this bandwagon.
I had no idea what to expect with this movie. I just knew that it was a George Romero vampire movie. And I was so pleasantly surprised. It like exceeded my expectations. I had no idea what to expect.
I was so scared. I was scared you were like, I hated it.
No. I really loved it. I paid attention to the whole movie. I mean, I like 70s horror movies. Yes. And this was like pretty much, this was right up my alley.
Well, yeah, because you texted me. We were talking about films to review, and you were talking about that film you were watching. And you're like, I don't like this film. So I was like, have you seen Martin? And you're like, no. And I was like, you should watch it. You're like, okay. And then I was like, he was like, I'm going to watch it. I was like, okay. And then I saw it today. I was like, what did you think? He goes, and you went, I watched it. I was like, oh, God, he hated it. I was so scared. I was like, because you were like, I watched it. I was like,
I was playing it cool.
I know. I was so nervous. I was like, oh, so did you watch it? Yeah, I watched it. You want to review it? Yeah, we'll review it.
Yeah. Like, no, I loved it. I thought it was really great.
Good. Yeah. Good. Yay.
I think very ahead of its time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. That concludes this episode of Channel Sundown reviewing Martin. That's the wrong side. This is the side. Martin.
I'm not Martin.
Martin.
Martin? How'd you get in here?
I have friends. You guys remember to like and subscribe. I seek approval. You guys also comment. Let us know. Have you guys seen Martin? Do you guys like Martin? Do you think what we're saying is totally incorrect and you feel a different way about the film? Write it down. We'll read it. Eventually. Joking. Guys, just go ahead and comment below. Tell us how you feel. And we will read it. Promptly.
And don't judge a book by its cover.
Don't.
And brush after every meal.
You got any more? Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, bye.
Your hemorrhoids okay?
Jesse, I don't have it right.